Millbrook was dozing under the starry sky. The streets were quiet and empty, with only occasional street lamps casting yellow circles of light on the asphalt. Evening lights in the houses were gradually dimming. Townspeople were preparing for sleep. On Main Street, the neon sign of the pharmacy flickered gently, reflecting in the windows of closed shops. Around midnight, the peace was disturbed by a strange humming in the power grid. It grew louder, as if a huge invisible bumblebee was circling above the town. Suddenly, all electric lighting flickered and went out, plunging Millbrook into complete darkness. For a few seconds, absolute silence reigned. Then, just as suddenly, the light returned, first hesitantly flickering, then burning at full strength. It seemed as if nothing had happened. The town once again sank into its usual nighttime peace. But something had imperceptibly changed in the very air, as if reality had shuddered for a moment and shifted sideways by a hair's breadth. James Caldwell woke up to a sunbeam that cut through his eyes like a blade. Something was wrong. Too bright for— what time was it? He sat up abruptly in bed, staring at the alarm clock on the nightstand. 12. Blinking. Over and over. Damn power issues. A thought about an important client meeting flashed through his mind. His heart skipped a beat. He grabbed his phone. It showed only a blank screen. The silence outside was unnatural. Usually at this time, Mrs. Peterson would already be terrorizing the neighborhood with her lawnmower, and groups of school children would fill Maple Street with cheerful noise. But now, complete silence. James hastily pulled on his suit, grabbed his briefcase and thermos of coffee. Maybe I'm just being paranoid, he thought. Millbrook is a small town in Maine where everyone knows each other, and any oddity usually has a simple explanation. But as soon as he drove onto the road, his anxiety only intensified. No cars, no pedestrians, not a soul in sight. The streets looked like sets from an apocalyptic movie. He reached for the radio, trying to catch any signal, but only white noise came from the speakers. The phone showed no signs of life either. No signal bars, no messages. For a moment, James felt as if he was the only person left in the whole world. James drove slowly through the empty streets, gripping the steering wheel of his Mustang so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The sunlight seemed to mock him, flooding the deserted city with an unnaturally bright glow. Buildings, roads, parked cars, everything was frozen, like exhibits in museum displays. A horrible feeling appeared in his stomach, as if all his insides had been twisted and left empty. He stopped the car near Joe's small grocery store, a place where usually at this time you couldn't squeeze through the crowd of pensioners buying fresh pastries. James took a deep breath and grabbed the door handle. The bell above the entrance chimed cheerfully, but this sound only emphasized the eerie silence inside. The air conditioner was still running, blowing cool air through the empty aisles. On the counter stood Mr. Joe's unfinished cup of coffee, and next to it, an open local newspaper with an incomplete crossword puzzle. The pencil had rolled into the gap between the counter and the cash register. "Hey, is anybody here?" His voice echoed unnaturally loud in the empty space. In response, only the quiet hum of refrigerators and the rustle of ventilation. The nearby supermarket greeted him with open doors and dead silence. Abandoned shopping carts stood frozen in the aisles, as if their owners had vanished into thin air. Unpaid items still lay on the checkout conveyor, a carton of milk, bread, and baby diapers. James walked slowly between the rows of shelves, his footsteps echoing loudly in the eerie silence. The bright fluorescent lights mercilessly emphasized the emptiness of the space. Somewhere in the depths of the supermarket, a refrigerator hummed monotonously. On the shelves, cans, pasta packages, and water bottles stood in neat rows. Everything as usual, just without customers. In the meat department, the display case with chilled steaks was still running, and near the produce section, an automatic sprayer occasionally misted the empty trays with water. The panic he had been holding back now spread through his chest like an icy wave. He rushed to his parents' house on Oak Avenue, mentally begging for all this to be just a nightmare or a senseless joke. But the empty house with the TV turned on, showing only white noise, killed his last hope. He started the car and rushed to his sister's house. James had never covered this distance so quickly before. But here, too, he was met only by an eerie silence. Children's toys were scattered across the floor as if the kids had just stepped out for a moment. But there was no one, not a single soul. The ground seemed to sway beneath James's feet. He collapsed heavily onto his sister's porch and clutched his head in his hands. His throat tightened with helplessness and despair. His entire life, everyone he knew and loved, just vanished. They dissolved into thin air as if they had never existed. Thoughts raced frantically through his mind, searching for any logical explanation. Maybe this was just a dream? He pinched his arm. The pain was completely real. Maybe he had gone mad? But no, the empty streets, abandoned belongings, warm coffee were too tangible and material to be hallucinations. Tears involuntarily rolled down his cheeks when he saw his niece's bicycle thrown on the lawn. Just yesterday, he had promised to teach her how to ride without training wheels. Now it was a promise that he might never be able to keep. Though aware of the futility of his actions, James still decided to visit Mike, his best friend since high school years. They had planned to meet this evening to watch a baseball game. Now that meeting seemed like something unreal from a distant past. The driveway was empty, but Mike's old pickup truck was in the garage. James opened the front door. It was unlocked, as always. In the living room, the TV was on, showing the same white noise. 2 bottles of beer stood on the coffee table, with a bag of chips and the TV remote next to them. "Mike?" James called out, though he knew there would be no answer. His voice bounced off the walls of the empty house, returning as a painful echo of loneliness. On the wall hung their photo from last year's fishing trip. He and Mike were holding a huge bass and smiling widely at the camera. James touched the photograph with trembling fingers. "Where are you all?" he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. James approached the bar where Mike kept his collection of spirits. He pulled out a bottle of Jack Daniels, their favorite whiskey for special occasions. He and Mike had always joked that they would open it when the end of the world came. Well, it seemed that moment had arrived. With trembling hands, he unscrewed the cap and took a large swig straight from the bottle. The whiskey burned his throat, but the sensation was almost pleasant. It reminded him that he was still alive, still existing in this maddened, empty world. Casting one last look at his friend's living room, James gripped the bottle tightly and walked out onto the porch. The sun hung high in the sky, flooding everything around with bright, almost unnatural light. He got into his car, placed the bottle on the passenger seat, and slowly drove out onto the deserted street, not knowing where to head in this ghost town. James reached the hill on the outskirts of town, which offered a view of all of Millbrook. The sun was already setting, and he decided this would be the best place to spend what could be his final hours. With the bottle of whiskey, he headed to his favorite observation spot. Below stretched a dead city, silent and empty, like a set from an apocalyptic film. Not a single movement on the streets. Even the birds seemed to have abandoned this place. Only the wind wandered through empty streets, lifting scattered papers and fallen leaves into the air. Millbrook had turned into a ghost town, as if all its inhabitants had vanished in an instant, leaving behind only shadows of former life. He sat down, leaning against an old oak tree, and took another sip of whiskey. The grass beneath him was soft and cool. The alcohol dulled the pain, but couldn't chase away the feeling of complete solitude. Suddenly, his gaze was captured by the sky. The sunset was different, unlike any he had seen before. The sun, huge and almost hypnotic, slowly sank below the horizon, painting the sky with colors that seemed impossible in the ordinary world. Waves of purple light intertwined with emerald ribbons, creating bizarre patterns in the sky. Golden rays pierced these otherworldly colors, creating a kaleidoscope effect. The spectacle was so beautiful that James momentarily forgot about the tragedy, completely absorbed by this extraordinary sight. If this really is the end, he thought, taking another sip, at least it turned out to be beautiful. As the last rays of sun dissolved into darkness, James drained the remaining whiskey in one long gulp. The bottle slipped from his hand and rolled down the slope, leaving a trail in the flattened grass. With steady, though slow movements, he stood up and walked to his car. James opened the glove compartment. The cold metal of the gun felt unnaturally heavy in his hand. He never thought he would use the weapon this way. He had kept it for self-defense, but now it seemed like the only way out of this nightmare. James took one last look at the dark city. Not a single light shone in the windows, not a sound came from the streets. The city lay dead, just like his hope. A loud shot shattered the evening silence. For a moment, everything froze, and then James's body slowly slumped onto the cool grass. The last thing he saw were the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, indifferent to the drama that unfolded beneath them. Suddenly, the darkness of the city began to dissipate. One by one, streets lit up with evening lights, creating a ghostly glow over the empty city. It looked like a theater stage before the start of a performance. Everything ready, but the actors hadn't yet appeared. Then the electricity flickered again. The entire city plunged into absolute darkness for several long seconds. When the light returned, it brought with it sounds, the humming of cars, human voices, music from open cafe windows. The city came alive, as if waking from a strange dream. But James's body was no longer on the hill. Only the lonely car stood as a silent witness to what had happened. In the grass, a shell casing gleamed, the only evidence that here had been a person who met his last sunset.